Jackie, it's Ken. Can you hear me?
Yep, coming through loud and clear.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Commissioner Holzman is here. Is anyone on?
Commissioner Kochmar's here.
Yes, commissioners, we're just waiting a few minutes. We'll be on in just a moment.
Okay. Good morning. I just like to have confirmation that I'm in the right spot. Thank you.
Yes, good morning.
Good morning, Commissioner.
Good morning, Commissioner. we supposed to start at 9 or 10?
Commissioner, I thought it was 9.
This is Nathan Williams. I asked the RLJ yesterday and he said 9.
Yes, 9 o'clock is correct. 9 o'clock is correct. All right, let's reconvene and go on the record. Good morning. Today is January 21st, 2022. The time is 9:10 a.m. We are continuing the evidentiary hearing in the case of the application of Missouri American Water Company for a certificate of convenience and necessity regarding the water system and sewer system of the city of Eureka, Missouri. It's our file number WA-2021-0376, along with, consolidated with, file number SA-2021-0377. My name is Ken Sire, and I'm the regulatory law judge presiding over the hearing. The hearing, again, is taking place in the hearing room in the Governor Office Building, as well as over Cisco WebEx on the internet. So, Mr. Cooper, call your next witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. We would call Ms. Kelly Simpson.
All right. Good morning.
Good morning.
Would you raise your right hand to be sworn in? Thank you. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you give in this hearing shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Cooper.
Thank you, Judge. Please state your name.
Kelly Simpson.
By whom are you employed and what capacity?
I am the owner of Flynn Engineering, LLC.
Have you caused to be prepared for the purposes of this proceeding certain direct and rebuttal testimony in question and answer form?
Yes, I have.
Is it your understanding that that testimony has been marked as Exhibits 9 and 10 for identification?
Yes.
Do you have any changes that you would like to make to that testimony at this time?
I do not.
If I ask you the questions which are contained in Exhibits 9 and 10 today, would your answers be the same?
Yes, they would.
Are those answers true and correct to the best of your information, knowledge, and belief?
Yes.
Your Honor, I would offer Exhibits 9 and 10 into evidence and tender the witness for cross-examination.
Is there any objection? Hearing none, Exhibits 9 and 10 are admitted into evidence. All right, Mr. Williams, cross-examination.
Thank you. Good morning, Ms. Simpson.
Good morning.
In your direct testimony, I think it's on about, or is on page 7, you say that someone made you aware of GIS data that was relevant to your engineering report pertaining to buried assets. Is that correct?
Yes,
Who made you aware of that GIS data?
that was Derek Lynham with Missouri American Water.
Had you had any interactions with Mr. Lyman prior to him making you aware of the GIS data?
Interactions as in this particular project or just in general?
Let's say with regard to this particular project.
None.
Had you worked with or had interactions with him on other projects?
Yes.
And what were the nature of those interactions?
Derek was a project manager for some water treatment plants where he asked me to do some work as a consultant. We also used to be colleagues at Missouri American Water.
What did you do at Missouri American Water?
I was in various roles in the engineering department, from engineer to operations engineer to engineering manager, with responsibility for planning, design, construction management of water and wastewater infrastructure.
Well, you're familiar with GIS data in general?
I was certainly familiar that there was GIS information in the world. I did not know specifically what was available to the public or what detailed information was involved with that.
Were you aware there was GIS data available for San Luis County?
I was not.
Thank you. No further questions at this time.
Ms. Briggs.
Good morning, Ms. Simpson.
Good morning.
Who hired you to produce this engineering report?
Joe Batis. Batis.
Did you have a scope of work outlining what your responsibilities would be and the deliverables?
Yes, I've done several of these reports for Mr. Batis, and the scope has been the same throughout.
Could you generally describe the scope of work?
Yes, I am tasked with developing an inventory of assets for water and wastewater systems, estimating the age of those assets, determining or estimating a replacement cost for those assets, depreciating that replacement cost based on depreciation rates or periods, and then also estimating an overall high-level condition of those assets.
Who prepared the scope of work?
The scope of work was an effort between me and Joe at the beginning of when these projects start. When I first started doing these projects for Mr. Batis, we worked out what the scope should be, what I'm able to do, and what the appraisers would need to be able to do their reports.
How long have you and Mr. Batis been working on these types of things?
From my records, I did my first engineering report for an appraiser in 2017.
Was it included in your scope of work to actually go out and inspect the utilities?
We might be using the word inspect differently. I would more call it an observation, a visual observation of the above-ground assets through either a field visit or photos taken by others. When I do my field visit and I take photos, I review those photos in my office, just like I do the photos taken by others.
So your scope of work did not actually require you to visit the site?
No.
As an engineer, do you believe it's important to visit the site and actually see the utility before you assess its condition?
Did you use the word necessary?
Important. Do you believe it's important to do that?
I believe it is, ideally, I would visit the site, but it is not necessary to complete the level of report that I'm doing for the appraisers.
Could you repeat that again, please?
Ideally, I would visit the site. It is not necessary to do the level of work that I'm doing for the appraisers.
You said you were hired to conduct a high-level review.
Yes,
How do you define a high-level review?
I use 5 designations in my high-level review: excellent, very good, good, fair, and poor. If you look at that as a grading scale, A through F, I gave Eureka a C.
What did you base that C on?
The high-level condition assessment was based on the observation of photos and information provided by the city.
So what did the photos and the information about the city tell you that made your recommendation a C as opposed to an A or a F?
Well, in the photos, the photos and the information from the city, let's talk about the photos first. I could see the physical condition of the above-ground assets. The information from the city included the year of installation, so I knew the age of the assets. Some assets were certainly older and in fair to poor condition, while some assets were newer and in very good condition. So taking all that as an overall condition, I gave it a C, when you consider all of the assets from the age ranges and conditions.
How did you assess the below-ground assets?
I assumed the condition of the below-ground assets were similar to the condition of the above-ground assets, which is the process, procedure, methodology I have used in every report I've done for the appraisers.
Is it fair to say that the above-ground assets, there was a range? You said some were in very good condition, some were in poor condition. Is that accurate?
Yes, that's what I said.
So if there was such a range of, excuse me, if there was such a range of the above-ground assets, how could you analyze? Let me start that over.
Okay.
If there was such a range of condition of the above-ground assets, how were you able to then determine the condition of the below-ground assets?
After looking at the above-ground assets and the information that I used to do my overall high-level condition assessment, when I arrived at that C answer, I used the same answer for the below-ground assets.
Oh, okay. So you made something of an average of the above ground between the very good and the very poor and got a C.
Yes.
Do you remember writing in your report that you produced 2 reports, correct? You produced 2 engineering reports. One was in January and the other one was in March of 2020?
Yes.
Okay. Do you remember writing in your report that the city of Eureka gave you limited information about these assets?
I do.
What did they give you?
I was given the insurance list of replacement cost. I was given a list of water main by type and size, a list of sewers by type and size, between information from the city and other field notes from the appraisers, I was able to estimate the year the above-ground assets were placed in service.
And I hate to interject here, but this was before you received the GIS data, right?
That's correct.
Okay.
I can't think of off the top of my head any other information that they provided. I try to list in my report and, and describe where the information comes from.
Were you here yesterday to hear Mr. Betas testify?
Yes, I was.
Did you hear him talk about 50 pounds of documents that that he received from Mr. Sabo at the City of Eureka?
I did hear that. Yes, I heard that.
Okay. Did you receive 50 pounds of documents from anybody?
I received no physical pounds of information. There was a lot of data downloaded by Mr. Betas into, I believe, a Google Drive that we had access to. I did sift through that data. I'm particularly looking for information that can help me develop my inventory of assets and age of assets. There was a lot of information provided, but a lot of it was not useful to me. There was a lot of O&M manuals and budgets, financial data, things like that really did not help me provide the information I needed in my report.
So would some of this information, extraneous information you received, be considered part of the reason why you got limited information about the assets, as you said in your report?
I'm sorry, I don't think I quite understand.
That wasn't a very good question. Let me work on something else here. You stated that the City of Eureka gave you limited information. Is that correct?
I did.
What was missing initially? Before you got the GIS data.
Yeah. First of all, almost every report I do is based on limited information, so this is not unusual. The information I would have loved to have had would be documentation of the original cost of the asset with the years that they were installed in a comprehensive spreadsheet or something.
So it must have been something of a revelation when Mr. Lyon called you and said that he had GIS data. Is that true?
Well, that was certainly helpful for the buried assets. It didn't do much for the above ground assets. I'd already, from other sources, I was able to estimate the year of installation of the above ground assets.
In your experience as a professional engineer and also your experience working at Missouri American, were you aware that Missouri American, or would it be, let me start over. In your experience as an engineer and your experience working at Missouri American, would it be, could you assume that Missouri American would have GIS data on underground assets in St. Louis County?
They did not have GIS data on the underground assets.
Missouri American didn't.
No, the GIS data that they provided to me was the year that buildings were built within the municipality of Eureka.
You said that the City of Eureka gave you an insurance asset list, right?
Yes, that included their above ground assets.
And you use those valuations to compute your values?
Yes, I use those insurance replacement costs for my replacement costs for the above ground assets.
Is that for both reports or just the first report?
Both reports.
Okay.
The only thing that changed between the January report and the March report was the assumption that I used to estimate the age of the buried assets.
Did you hear Mr. Betas testify yesterday that insurance value is different than fair market value?
I do not recall that in his testimony.
In your experience, is insurance value different than fair market value?
I can't answer that, I don't know.
Did you receive information from Missouri American about the system's condition?
No.
Did you receive information from Missouri American about whether the systems are in DNR compliance?
No.
Did you do any investigation on your own whether the systems are in DNR compliance?
I did not. When I do receive the MDNR inspection reports, in my experience, they do not indicate a condition of assets.
But if there's DNR issues, that would reflect on the condition, wouldn't it?
No.
Why is that?
I would defer to Mr. Eisenlawful's rebuttal testimony where he describes in detail why that is not the case.
Okay, could you summarize that for us today? You're the professional engineer that was supposed to assess the conditions.
I cannot summarize that. It's on file. I'm certain you can get it.
But you're aware of how to conduct an open DNR resources request?
If you're referring to the sunshine rule, yes, I am.
Okay. I'm going to show you what's been marked as staff exhibit 103.
Okay.
Do you recognize that?
Yes.
What is that?
This is a report that I sent to Mr. Betas on January 18th, 2020, an engineering report for the water and wastewater system appraisal, Eureka, Missouri.
And that looks like a true and accurate copy of it?
Yes, it does.
Thank you. How much did you initially value the systems at?
I would hesitate to say that I'm valuing the system. I am providing information to the appraisers who value the system.
Okay. Well, if you could turn to page 6. So the table at the bottom, or the second table, you have the estimated depreciated book value. What's the total estimated depreciated book value that you have?
$16,086,900.61.
And how is that divided between the water and the sewer system?
The water being $10,565,695.54. Wastewater, $5,521,205.06.
Okay. So you made that report available to Mr. Betas on January 18th, 2020?
Yes,
And then shortly after that, Mr. Lynham at Missouri American contacted you?
that's correct.
Do you recall what date he contacted you?
I do not recall the date that he first contacted me because that was a phone call. I mean, we have the email, so we can tell that it was somewhere in the middle of February. beginning to middle of February.
He contacted you by phone initially?
As I recall, the initial contact was by phone, where he told me he was familiar with the Eureka system. I don't recall if he said he lived near there, or at least drove through there, regularly, and he thought that the growth rate of the city was different, significantly different, possibly, than the assumption that I made in my report.
Do you remember more specifically how long after January 18th it was that he called you?
I do not.
Okay.
I think in the exhibit that you have of our emails, the first email might be somewhere around February 10th, possibly.
I think it's the 6th.
Okay. So the email on the 6th, there was something significant on the 10th, that I think we had a Teams meeting, or a Teams meeting or Zoom meeting or something like that on the 10th.
Okay. So in this first phone call, was there discussion of GIS data, or was it all about the growth rate?
As I recall in the phone call, he being familiar with the area, thought that the growth rate that I assumed in my original January report was not representative of the way the city actually expanded and grew. And he let me know that there was GIS data available and that I could use that data if I wanted to make a better, use better data to estimate that growth rate, and which in turn is then flows through to the date of the buried assets.
Okay. I'm going to show you what's been marked as staff exhibit 107, and you're anticipating it.
Thank you.
You read it. Excuse me, you recognize those emails?
Yes, I do.
Oh, Judge, I forgot to ask that staff exhibit 103 be admitted. I would ask that it be admitted.
All right, Exhibit 103, that is the January 18th, 2020 report. Are there any objections?
There's not, Your Honor. It's also attached to Mr. LeGrand's testimony, so it'll hopefully end up coming into play.
Okay. Then Exhibit 103 is admitted.
And then I would also ask that staff exhibit 107 be admitted. That's the emails between Missouri American and Flint Engineering.
Any objection? 107 is admitted.
I would ask you to turn to page 24, Ms. Simpson, and the page numbers are in the top right.
Yes, thank you. Sorry that took so long to staple over the page number.
I apologize for that. I'll have to tell my secretary to fix that next time.
Okay, I'm there.
Okay. And when is that email dated?
Thursday, February 6th, 2020.
And that's an email from Mr. Lyon to yourself?
Yes.
And it states, Kelly, do you have time to meet next Monday or Tuesday to discuss the Eureka engineering report? Thanks, Derek.
Yes.
Okay. And then if you could flip the page to page 23. Less than a minute later, you answered, Derek, I'm available by phone Monday morning. It sounds like you're making arrangements to meet.
Yes.
Okay. And moving up on February 7th, Mr. Lynham writes to you, he pulled some statistics from parcels out of GIS and wondered how it might change the depreciated value if we use some different assumptions. Is that what that says?
Yes.
And later that day on February 7th, if you could turn to page 22. At the bottom of the page, you write, I'll come to your office and bring everything on my laptop. We can test various assumptions live on the spreadsheet and see what it does.
Yes.
Why did you think it would be necessary to go to his office?
If Mr. Lyon was querying GIS data, I wanted to watch him do it. I wanted to be there so that I'm not just accepting data over an email, that I'm seeing it live, and I know from my own eyes that it came from St. Louis County, was not manipulated in any way, shape, or form.
I'm not familiar with GIS data. Maybe could you explain in more detail what GIS data contains?
I'm certainly not an expert on GIS data. I can tell you what happened that particular, for this project.
Okay.
This is going to be hard to explain. You can query data based on municipalities. So the first step was to look at the parcels with buildings within the municipality of Eureka. And that came to a number, let me look so I'm not saying something wrong. When we did this 2 years ago, the total number of parcels was 3,925, which was very consistent with the number of customers at that time, 3,947. We then queried the data for the number of homes built, buildings built between the dates of wells being installed. As stated in my January and March report, I made the assumption that the below-ground assets were installed with the expansion of the system being each well for the water system and each lift station for the wastewater system. So again, we looked at the number of homes built between each of those time periods and calculated a percentage. So in each time frame, there was a percent of homes built. For example, my original assumption was that 70% was built at the beginning of it, when the system was placed in service. That number was actually 7.87%. I rounded up to 10 for my report.
What did you originally estimate at 70?
Yes, my original report estimated that 70% of the assets were placed in service, buried assets placed in service whenever the system began operation. And then with each expansion of a well installation, approximately 5% with each of those. That resulted in a very old and very depreciated below-ground asset number.
So you originally estimated 70%, but after looking at the GIS data, it turned out to be what?
The actual number was 7.87%, but I rounded up to 10. I mean, it's still an assumption, so I'm not going to say approximately 7.87. Is that going to be approximate? I wanted to round up or down to the nearest 10%.
You had a telephone conversation with Mr. Lynham before the email started, and then you went to his office to discuss the GIS data. Did he give you any idea why he, well, you said that he thought there was a lot of new growth and that, I guess, the, your assumptions about the ages of the buildings were that they were too old. Did he tell you why he thought it was important to basically increase the, your estimated depreciated book value?
He did not say anything to me about increasing my estimated depreciated book value. He wanted me to have the most accurate information to meet my assumptions.
But as the prospective buyer of this real estate, the information he was giving you was increasing the value of the purchase price, right?
He was providing me information he was aware of that could allow me to make a better assumption on the age of the buried assets.
I'm going to show you what's been marked as staff exhibit 104. Actually, it's been already admitted into evidence. But it's your second report?
I have it in here.
Okay. What's the date of your second report?
March 16th, 2020.
Did you mention the first report in the second report?
I did not.
Why is that?
I saw no reason to.
But you produced a full report. Your first report is, you signed it, you have all your attachments to it. Why didn't you think it was important to mention the first report in your second report?
I wouldn't typically do that. I have no better answer for you.
Did you, I think we established that you never actually visited the assets before writing your reports, right?
That's correct.
So when you wrote in your survey bubble that you visited on December 9th, 2021, that was after you submitted your second report, right?
That's correct.
Just a moment, please. That's all we have.
All right, thank you. Chairman Sylvie, do you have any questions? All right. Any questions from the other commissioners?
No, thank you, Judge.
No, thank you, Judge.
All right. Okay, I do have some questions myself. Ms. Simpson, in what states are you licensed as a professional engineer?
I'm licensed in Missouri and Illinois.
How long have you held a license in each of those states?
In Missouri since 2007, in Illinois since 1998.
And I apologize if you've already addressed this, but who was it that first contacted you related to the services that you provided for this particular appraisal, and who ultimately contracted with you for those services?
The answer is the same for both of those questions, and it's Mr. Joseph Bates.
Okay, that's what I thought. That January 18th, 2020 report, was it intended to be a final document or a draft document, something of that nature?
It was intended to be a final document.
So not any sort of draft or preliminary report?
You're correct.
How about for the, March 16, 2020? I assume that was intended to be a final document as well.
Yes.
All right. When it comes to your visit to the site on December 9th, 2021, what was the purpose of that visit?
Because of this process, I thought it was important for me to visit the site.
Was that your only site visit?
I visited Eureka at the very beginning of this project. I believe it was in August, so that was in 2019. Mr. Sable was available to sit with the group. He answered a lot of our questions that we typically do during our site visit. However, he did not have any operations staff available to take us around to the site.
So you didn't? So you just met with him in their office?
Yes, our typical site visits include some interviews at the beginning. We interview and ask questions, tell them the kind of information we need to complete our reports, and then typically do a site visit after that.
So so you didn't go around to any of the wells or the wastewater system?
Not on that day, no.
Okay. When it comes to the December 9th, 2021 visit, was that part of the work under your contract with Mr. Bates?
No, that was not.
Are you aware of any work that has been performed by the city on their systems since the site visit by the appraisers?
I am not aware. I believe other people have answered that question, but I don't know the answer.
If you would refer to page 4 of your direct testimony. You state that you've completed engineering reports in support of acquisitions in Missouri, Illinois, Kentucky, Mississippi, and Florida. Was all that work done under Flint Engineering?
Yes.
What percentage of Flint Engineering's work is allocated to supporting acquisitions like the one in question here?
That is a tough question to answer. Do you mean like in just last year, by revenue, by assignment? I'm not sure how to answer that question.
Well, what I'm interested in is how many other similar reports have you done related to water or sewer acquisitions?
I do have that information. Since 2017, I have completed 21 reports for appraisers, and I have 3 ongoing, so 24 total assignments. Similar types of engineering reports that were not for appraisers, but directly to other utilities. Since 2015, I have completed 79 of those.
All right. How many of those jobs were done for Missouri American Water or any of the affiliates of American Water?
Of the 24 reports that I discussed for the appraisers since 2017, 3 were for Illinois American, 13 were completed for Missouri American with 3 ongoing for Missouri American, and 5 were for other investor-owned utilities.
And then of those reports, not just the ones for Missouri American Water and the other American Water affiliates, how many of those were what you would label high level?
Every single one of them.
Okay. In your high level reviews, what information do you use?
I use visual observation, either through photos or from my own site visit, or my own photos after my site visit, and I look at the physical condition of the assets. Information from others would include age. If there would be a tank inspection, a recent tank inspection, sometimes that will have information that indicates the condition of that asset.
And so there are times when you do make site visits for these other jobs.
Yes,
And I know you kind of shied away from the term inspection, but do physical observations of the assets.
yes.
Do you review the maintenance records of those utilities?
I do not typically dig into the details of maintenance records. That would be a question we ask typically in our site visit interview, the beginning of the site visit where we interview whoever's available.
And I know you didn't do it for Eureka, but on these other reviews that you've done, have you reviewed the environmental compliance reports for those reviews?
That is a piece of information that we request at the beginning. It is not unusual that I do not receive that. And the way I use that information is, again, I'm trying to develop an inventory of assets and an age of the assets. Sometimes those reports will help me understand what type of assets are out there. Sometimes it'll even provide a capacity of the tank or the year of the tank or something like that. So those reports can be useful if I have them, but again, it's not unusual that I do not receive those.
When it comes to sewer systems, and again, not just limited to Eureka, but any of the reviews that you've done, do you review infiltration and inflow studies?
If that information is available, I do review those.
And you testified that at least since 2017, all of your work related to the water and sewer utilities have been high-level reviews, correct?
That is correct.
Do you ever do any kind of reviews besides high-level?
Yes, I do.
And what does that work entail as compared to a high-level review?
I would distinguish the difference between a high-level review, which is what the appraisers have asked for, versus a due diligence report that would really be a much bigger level of effort. And that it would be digging into records, looking at maintenance records, leak records, anything that would give me a sense of the condition of assets and make recommendations for improvements.
And again, I apologize if you've already answered this, but I know you've reviewed photographs of the systems more or less in lieu of site visits. Who provided those photographs?
In this particular case, they were provided by Joe Bates from his December 10th site visit.
recall how many photos that involved?
I believe there were over 200 photos.
If I could direct your attention to page 3 of your March 16th, 2020 report.
I'm sorry, Your Honor, what page?
Page 3. And that's Exhibit 104.
You said the March report, right?
Yes, March 16th.
Okay. On my copy that I was just given, that's Exhibit 103.
Yes. I'm sorry, no, 104.
Judge, just to clarify, I don't think we didn't ask for the second report to be entered because I think it's already attached to somebody's testimony.
It's actually attached to, the witness's testimony.
I apologize, Your Honor. I was looking at the January report, which is Exhibit 103.
Okay. So you do have a copy of 104, the March 16th, okay.
I do. I'm now on page 3 of my March report.
Excellent. You explained the assumption used in that version of the report to allocate the distribution assets by year, which was to prorate the distribution assets based on the approximate amount of the new buildings in the period between well installations. And you indicated that you use St. Louis County GIS parcel data for the analysis, including the year each building was built. And you kind of touched on it in response to Ms. Brett's questions, but can you explain by year when the building was built, how it was allocated to each respective well? And again, you may have kind of touched on that, but can you maybe explain that a little more in depth?
Yes. So on table 4, on page 3 of my March report, across the top of that table are dates. 1959, when the original system was placed in service, and then 1977, 1990, and so on as wells were installed. I asked Derek to query the GIS data to give me the number of homes that were built before 1959, and then between 1959 and 1977, and then between 1977 and 1990, and so on. I use those numbers of homes to get a percentage for each of those time frames. And that's where the 10%, if you look at the second to last line in table 4, 10%, 20%, 10, 10, 30, 10, and 10.
Okay, so just as an example, let's say between 1977 and 1990, it would be the number of homes added between those years? Or no?
I believe that is correct.
Okay. Which results in that 20% figure or the 10% figure?
The 10%, I believe.
The 1990 10%.
Yes.
Okay. And what was your rationale for doing it that way?
Do you mean assuming that the system expanded with each well? That seemed like a reasonable assumption to me.
Yeah, but that was your rationale?
Yes.
A well is added and new homes are added that are connected to that well?
Yes.
Do you know what size mains would be typically installed with a new well, and which sizes would typically be installed as development occurs in the area served by the new well?
I could make an assumption, but I don't know what you're trying to get to.
Well, I would assume, of course, I'm no water main expert, but I would assume that different sized water mains have different values.
Certainly.
So, I'm just asking whether you make assumptions on the size of mains and distribution lines that come with a new well.
For these reports, I do not do that.
Okay. Was there any other, or can you think of any other information that was available or could be available besides the GIS data to determine the age of the water mains?
The best information to get that, to determine the age, would be plans, construction plans, construction documents.
I see. And I assume Eureka didn't have those kind of documents.
No, which is typical.
Okay. As a licensed engineer in the state of Missouri, are you familiar with the Missouri Statute Section 327.411, which governs which documents should be signed and sealed by a professional engineer?
Yes, I am.
But in this case, both the January 18th and March 16th, 2020 reports didn't need to be signed and sealed.
In my opinion, no.
And why was that?
I was in no way making any type of recommendation for any type of improvement, and nothing in this report could be used in construction.
Could you turn to, and this is, let me see here, I believe this is still your March 16th, 2020 report, Appendix D. It is on Schedule KES-1, page 14 of, looks like 26, maybe?
Yes, I'm there.
In the second table that has to do with wastewater assets, the entire table is titled Depreciated Value, Water Distribution Sewer Collection System, correct?
Yes.
Is the source for this table the information in Appendix A of your report, the insurance asset list?
No. The source for this table is the installation cost that I estimated by each size of main using unit cost, and the age of the buried assets that we previously discussed. I don't recall which table that is.
Okay, so for you, Appendix A has no relation to Appendix D.
Appendix D should also include the depreciated calculation from the insurance list. I did do that as part of the report.
Okay, could I direct your attention to Appendix A?
Okay.
it page 8 of 20?
Yes, it is.
All right. Just want to make sure I'm on the right page. So there are lines, that state 18-19 total building and content values and 19-20 total building and contents values. And they're both listed as $13,370,343. Can you tell us what those two lines mean?
I cannot. I did not prepare this document. This was provided to me by the city of Eureka. This is their replacement cost for their insurance coverage, which is what I used to, I use these figures as my replacement cost for the above ground assets.
Okay, and you know, I understand you didn't prepare that document, but did it strike you as odd that those two numbers were exactly the same?
I don't recall even noticing that 2 years ago.
Okay. And you wouldn't be aware of when the city last updated their insurance, their asset list for the sake of insurance?
I would not, since the heading of those columns is 2019 to 20, it's a safe assumption that this is up to date.
And you yourself didn't perform spot checks on any particular items on that list to check for accuracy of the value?
I did not dig into each number. I did give it what I would call a sanity check to make sure that the figures were not completely unreasonable.
Okay. Could I direct your attention to your server level testimony? On page 4, you use the term fully depreciated when you're referring to the generators.
Yes,
I think that's line 20, correct?
yes.
How do you define that term, fully depreciated?
Well, the depreciation is more of an accounting term that is used by utilities. Generators, I would have to look at the schedule that I use, but I believe they have a 10-year depreciation period. So if it's over 10 years old, it is fully depreciated.
And so is that did you come to the conclusion that they were fully depreciated based on information that the city gave you?
Well, the city gave me the dates that they were installed.
Okay. Does fully depreciated mean they're past the point of use?
Not in my opinion.
Sometimes yes, sometimes no.
If I'm looking at an asset and it's being used and fully depreciated, it is still useful.
Still has value.
In my opinion, yes.
Okay. And you I believe you touched on this when Ms. Brent's first brought up a high-level review and used terms ranging from excellent to very good, good, poor, et cetera. How do you define those terms? And I know you used like a letter grade of C for this system, But what makes a very good system a very good system versus a poor system?
It would be hard for me to define that for you. It's based on my years. I'm approaching 29 years in this water and wastewater industry. I've seen a lot of assets. So it's mostly based on my judgment of those assets.
So like Mr. Paytis would say, it's an art, not a science.
That's a very good way to put it, Your Honor.
Okay. All right, those are all the questions I have. Mr. Williams, do you have any follow-up questions?
I do not, thank you.
Ms. Fritz?
Thank you. Just following up on your grading scale, you said that this, overall, you graded the Eureka systems as a C,
Yes,
so that implies that it's average, right?
if you're thinking of letter grades, yes.
I remember from grade school. I guess that's what I'm basing it on. So C is average.
Yes.
What's a B? How would you consider that?
If you're asking me to define this the way that His Honor just did, I still can't do that. It's based on my judgment.
So a B, what would be an A?
Are you still asking me to define something I can't define?
Well, just to define it in layman's terms that we can understand.
A brand new system would be an A.
Okay,
Those are rarely for sale.
sure. So what would a B be?
Somewhere between an A and a C.
What would good be? What letter grade would a good get?
A C, which is what I gave Eureka.
Okay. So what's a D? Does D imply failing?
I'm trying really hard to answer this question for you to help you understand it, but it's very difficult when it's based on my judgment.
Sure, sure. So C equals good for at least for the Eureka system. In the past year, how many of the systems that you have reviewed got a C?
I would have to look at my records. I don't recall.
Can you give us an estimate?
No. I could look at my records and follow up with that.
Would you say that the majority of the assets that you've reviewed got a good?
I believe that's a safe assumption.
And so are those assets that are similar to Eureka's? At least in the condition?
I'd really feel more comfortable looking at my records and answering this question more completely after this.
Well, I don't think we're gonna have an opportunity to do that. So let me rephrase the question. Would you say that more than 50% of the assets you reviewed in the past year got a good?
If you really want a yes or no answer, I would say yes, but I would really rather look at my records before I say anything.
More than 75% of the assets you reviewed in the last year got a good?
I feel like that's the exact same question with a different number in it. I cannot answer without looking at my records.
The judge asked you to look at the table at the bottom of page 3 of the March report. Could you turn to that, please?
I'm there.
You said earlier that you had a conversation with Derek Lynham about a growth spurt in near Eureka. Is that correct?
I don't recall saying a growth spurt. I believe that what he said was he thought that the growth rate for the city and the expansion of the city was different than what I had assumed in my January report.
Okay. So that implies that he believed that the city was enlarging, gradually getting bigger and bigger, and, well, growing, right?
Yes, at a different rate than what I had assumed in my January report.
Okay. If you could turn to that table, please. At the top, or on the far left corner, you have different sizes of mains, is that correct?
Yes,
And there's numbers to the right of that?
yes,
Those are expressed in feet?
yes,
Okay, just to clarify.
yes, thank you.
So, what stood out to me to start out with is that the years are not cumulative, right? If you go down 1959 column, there's 634 feet of 2-inch main installed.
Correct.
Do you find it odd that for number of those years, it's the same numbers? How do you explain that?
Yes, that is a very good question. So the total amount of main provided to me by the city for 2-inch and 4-inch was 6,336 feet for each. We did find that a little bit unusual and went back to the city for verification, and they did verify that that's what they have in their records for 2-inch and 4-inch total main.
Could you repeat that, 6,000 feet, or what is that? What?
Yeah, the total, so the far right column in that table
Mm-hmm.
is the total feet of each size of main. So the total for 2-inch is 6,336,
Mm-hmm.
and the total for 4-inch is 6,336.
Okay.
Again, we thought that also was unusual and verified it with the city.
But then if you look at the division by years, a lot of the years are the same numbers too.
Well, yeah, that's just the math. It's 10%, 20%, 10%,
Okay.
10%.
Okay, and that's based on the rate.
Yes.
So looking at the percentage of main added per year, that's in the vertical column, line towards the bottom. In 1959, you assumed 10%, or you found 10% of main. 1977, 20%, 1990, 10, 96, 10, 2003, 30, 2006, 10, 2017, 10. Is that correct?
The percentages that you just recited are correct, but you incorrectly said that it was 10% of May that I found on GIS. The GIS information was number of homes built in those years.
Okay, yes, percentage of homes. Does that indicate to you, looks like there's a big spurt between 1996 and 2000.
Yes, Brent. We need everyone on WebEx to mute their audio. All right, you can go ahead, Ms. Brent. I'm sorry.
Judge, I'm just going to recall the question, that's all I have.
Okay. All right. Mr. Cooper, do you have redirect?
I do. Thank you, Your Honor. Ms. Simpson, during your testimony from staff initially, you talked about the observation of photos in order as a part of your review of the system, and explained that in this case you did review photos and did not observe the system prior to your reports, correct?
That is correct.
Are there other times that you have used that process?
Yes.
And it was mentioned that you later did observe the system, I think in December of last year, correct?
That is correct.
And did that change your high-level view of the condition of the Eureka system, water and sewer systems?
No, I saw nothing that day that would change my high-level review of the condition of the system assets.
You mentioned, I think in a perfect world, you'd like to have a spreadsheet from municipalities when you do these that lists out all the installation dates and original costs and that sort of information. Is that correct?
Yes,
Do you ever have that?
never, never.
Just to clarify, because I think there might have been, at least my interpretation was, there might have been some confusion along the way, but when you referred to the GIS data that you reviewed with Mr. Lynham, whose data was that? Was it Missouri American's data or someone else's?
The information is provided by St. Louis County, not Missouri American Water.
So it's not just information about St. Louis County, it's information that's collected and maintained by St. Louis County itself, correct?
That is correct.
There was a question about a difference or use of the insurance cost data to replicate fair market value, I think. And I think you rejected that idea that you used it for fair market value. Is that correct?
That is correct.
What do you use the insurance data for?
In this case, and in other cases, I use it to, I use those exact figures as my replacement cost for the assets, and that is included in the report that I give to the appraisers, who then do their, whatever they do to get to the fair market value.
So is there anything about your report that attempts to derive a fair market value?
No, I am not licensed to do that.
In your report, you ultimately identify I think it's referred to as book value. Is that correct?
I do call it that.
Okay. And do you believe that that's the same thing as what's sometimes referred to as a net book value?
The difference between what I have in my report is that I am depreciating the replacement cost in today's dollars, in this case, 2019 dollars. I depreciate the replacement cost to get to what I call a book value, which would be not the same thing that most utilities call their net book value, which is based off original installation cost.
You talked about the work you've done over the last few years in support of appraisals. What other types of work do you do as an engineer?
I do a lot of other things. You really?
Yeah, well, give me a kind of a summary if you could.
Okay, how about I just describe some of the current projects I'm working on
Sure.
in general?
That would work.
Okay, I am working on comprehensive planning studies that include looking at demand projections for water customers, using those demand projections to use a hydraulic model, put those demand projections into a hydraulic model to see when and where improvements might be needed. I'm working on some design of, I'm actually a sub-consultant for a design at a water treatment plant for adding a UV disinfection system. A sub-consultant on another project at a water treatment plant to upgrade chemical feed storage and bulk storage and feed equipment.
I'm sorry, what storage and feed equipment? Bulk?
Bulk, B-U-L-K.
You described the difference between a high-level review and a due diligence review. In this case, who was doing the due diligence review?
It's my understanding that Missouri American conducts their own due diligence review.
let me ask this, and it's possible you don't recall given your earlier responses, but one of the transactions that Missouri American has been involved in recently concerned Garden City. Were you involved in that transaction?
Yes,
Did you prepare a similar high-level review in regard to Garden City?
yes. I use the same procedure and methodology for all of the reports I prepare for the appraisers.
Do you happen to remember what high-level grade you gave Garden City?
I do not.
That's all the questions I have, Your Honor.
All right, thank you, Mr. Cooper. Does anyone need to take a break? All right. Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Maybe just 5 minutes.
All right. Yeah, let's reconvene. We'll go off the record and we'll reconvene at 10:35. So going off the record. All right, Mr. Williams, are you there?
Yes.
Do you have any objection to Ms. Simpson being excused?
I do not.
All right. Then, Ms. Simpson, you are excused. All right, let's go back on the record. Mr. Cooper, will call your next witness.
We would call Mr. Brian LeGrand.
Raise your right hand, please. Thank you. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony given in this hearing shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Please state your name. My name is Brian LeGrand, L-A-G-R-A-N-D. By whom are you employed and in what capacity?
I'm employed by Missouri American Water, and I'm the Director of Rates for Missouri.
Have you caused to be prepared for purposes of this proceeding certain direct and rebuttal testimony in question and answer form?
Yes, I have.
Is it your understanding that that testimony has been marked as Exhibits 11 and 12 for identification?
Yes.
Do you have any changes that you'd like to make to that testimony at this time?
I do not.
If I ask you the questions which are contained in Exhibits 11 and 12 today, would your answers be the same?
Yes.
Are those answers true and correct to the best of your information, knowledge, and belief?
They are.
Your Honor, I would offer Exhibits 11 and 12 in evidence and tender the witness for cross-examination.
Are there any objections to the admission of those documents? Hearing none, Exhibits 11 and 12 are admitted into evidence. Mr. Williams, your witness.
Thank you. No questions.
Ms. Perez.
I don't have anything either, thank you.
All right, Mr. LeGrand, I do have a few questions. Edward Dinan, the appraiser selected by the city, has he ever been involved in any appraisal work for Missouri American Water or any of the American Water affiliates?
I'm not aware if he has or has not been.
Okay. Same question about the appraiser selected by the other two appraisers, Elizabeth Goodman-Snyder.
If I could revise my answer on Mr. Johnson, I have seen their names in other appraisal reports for other Missouri American transactions that we have either filed with the commission or are evaluating. I can't speak to outside of Missouri.
Okay. Give me a second here. Are you familiar with the conditions that staff is recommending if the commission approves this transaction?
I know they're in the staff recommendation, and it is, I've not reviewed that recently. I believe I have it here, if there's something specific you'd like to direct me to.
All right. There is a condition number 7.
Give me a moment to.
Sure.
Okay, and I'm looking at the official case memorandum attached to Mr. Gately's rebuttal testimony, page 22. Is that the same condition 7 that you are referring to? it starts with requiring MSC to develop a plan to book.
Yes, I wanted to make sure I didn't overshoot it. Okay, on that condition, how do you envision that being accomplished if the commission authorizes the $28 million rate base proposed by your company?
Sure. And, you know, we've done this, it was a couple of years ago, we've done this with staff on Lawson, which was a transaction utilizing the same process.
So the city of Lawson?
Yes.
Missouri?
Yes, yeah, city of Lawson, water and sewer. And what you would do is you could, well, there's probably a variety of ways you do it, but you would take the list of assets, you know, we put together, you would take the assumption of original cost, and you would essentially, you know, gross that up or down such that it, you know, collectively the rate base adds up to the appraisal value. You know, and if you wanted to add include contributions, you could do that, but there would be then an offsetting increase in the asset value. You know, since there's no in the legislation, there's no reduction in the value of the appraisal for any contributed assets.
Okay. You mentioned the city of Lawson, but with any of the prior acquisitions of water and wastewater systems by Missouri American Water, was it always that the appraisal reports that you saw coming in gave a sales price per customer metric, or had you ever seen, or have you ever seen any that were based on, say, millions of gallons per day of treated sewage and so forth?
Well, so I cannot say that I have reviewed every appraisal. And I believe we've only, you know, there's only maybe 3 or 4 of these that we filed with the commission. And in the ones that I have seen, you know, the price per customer, as Mr. Bates was describing yesterday, is generally what I've also seen. But my review has not been exhaustive of every appraisal.
Of course. I'm going to change gears a bit here. When it came to the ballot measure, the Eureka ballot measure, did you or anyone at Missouri American Water have any role in formulating that language?
I can say I definitely did not have any role, and I don't know of anyone at Missouri American Water who did.
Are you aware of anyone that consulted with city personnel?
I'm not. I really didn't get particularly involved in the Eureka transaction until it was closer to being filed with the commission, given my role with the company. But no, I personally had no interaction with the city about the ballot language at all.
Okay. Are you familiar with, well, I would assume you're familiar with it, but you can tell me if you're not. The application from last year by Missouri American Water Company for approval of a certificate of convenience and necessity for the city of Hallsville sewer system.
Generally, yes.
Okay. Were you, or if you recall, or do you recall, in that situation, the ballot language simply stated, shall the wastewater, and then in parentheses, sewer utility owned by the city of Hallsville, Missouri, be sold? Can you tell me why that didn't include the sales price?
I wouldn't know. I think the city, you know, I think each city, I imagine, drafts their own language, perhaps model on other ones, but as far as why Hallsville chose to do it the way they did, I can't say.
And you couldn't speak to why, or whether that's more or less
believe in the City of Arnold acquisition, that sales price was in there, but I can't say really one or the other if it's common or uncommon to include it.
All right, those are all the questions that I have. All right, my mistake. I did not ask the commissioners if they have any questions. Do any of the commissioners have questions? No. All right, I hear none. Mr. Williams, do you have any follow-up questions?
No, thank you.
Ms. Brett?
No.
Any redirect?
No.
All right. Thank you, Mr. O'Brien. You're excused.
Okay, thank you, Judge.
Mr. Cooper, my understanding is that is the extent of your witnesses.
That's correct, Your Honor.
Okay.
Judge,
Yes.
this is Mr. Williams. I would like clarification from Missouri American Water if it is putting into evidence I believe it was a January appraisal.
Right.
I think yesterday we marked that, or you gave it a number, Your Honor, as a commission exhibit, and we agreed to provide it.
Yes, we may have done that off the record.
Oh, okay.
So yes, yesterday, I believe at the end of the day, I instructed Mr. Cooper to use exhibit numbers 300 to 399 for the photographs that have been discussed, and also for the January, was it January 18th?
I don't remember the exact January date.
That's fine. I was just wanting clarification on that. And if you don't mind, the other day, Chairman Sylvie asked me public counsel's position about the commission's ability to look behind the appraisal, I guess is how I would phrase it. And basically I responded, it wasn't terribly clear in the statutes, but after thinking about it, I would say the commission should read its jurisdiction expansively, because I don't see any other way that anyone looks behind the appraisal if the commission does not. Thank you.
Looking at my notes, it was a January 20th, 2020 appraisal report. So. All right, Ms. Brents, are you ready to call witnesses?
Yes, staff's first witness is Kurt Gately.
All right, Mr. Gately, would you raise your right hand, please? Thank you. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony given in this hearing shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Thank you. You go ahead, Ms. Brent.
Would you please state your name for the record and spelling?
Curtis Gately, CurtisGatley.
By whom are you employed and in what capacity?
I'm employed by the Missouri Public Service Commission. I'm the director or manager of the Water, Sewer, and Steam Department.
Are you the same Curtis Gately that prepared what's been marked as Exhibit 101? And you've also prepared parts of Exhibit 100, which is the staff report, correct?
Correct.
Which parts of the staff report did you prepare?
Various parts. It's a group project, so I have some portions in here, including
course, it's dealing with DNR compliance issues and some other things.
Okay. Do you have any changes to either your testimony or the staff report?
I do, on page 20 of 42 of my rebuttal, which is page 12 of the staff memo, the footnote, which refers to staff data request 0004, should be 0033.
With that change, is your staff report and your testimony true and correct to the best of your knowledge?
Yes,
If I asked you the same questions today, would they be the same?
yes.
Judge, I'd like to offer Exhibit 100 and 101 into evidence and tender the witness for cross-examination.
All right, are there any objections? All right, 100 and 101 are admitted. Mr. Williams, you have questions for the witness?
No, I do not, thank you.
Mr. Cooper?
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Gately, this kind of starts, see if there's some things we agree on before we go any further. Would you agree that Missouri American is a large water public utility within the meaning of 393.320, both for its water side and for its sewer side?
That's my understanding, yes.
And would you agree that Missouri American provides safe and adequate service?
As a general answer, yes. I'm not familiar with every situation and every instance, of course.
But you don't have any specific examples of them not providing safe and adequate service that come to mind, do you?
I do not.
Would you agree that Eureka's sewer system is a small, and again, this is a quirk of the statute, a small water system within the meaning of 393.320?
That's my understanding.
And same question as to Eureka's water system. It's a small water utility within the meaning of 393.320?
Yes.
Are you a certified general appraiser under Chapter 3039 of the revised statutes of Missouri?
I am not.
And staff is not presenting any testimony from a certified general appraiser, is it?
No.
And as I understand it, staff does not suggest a fair market value. Is that correct?
Correct.
We discussed, or at least it was mentioned previously, that at least in terms of Oric, Garden City, and Lawson, Missouri American has utilized the 393.320 appraisal process. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
And as I understand it, what triggers staff's interest in this case is the difference between the fair market value and what staff believes the net book value to be. Is that correct?
Staff is equally interested in each case, but yes, that is the crux of the argument on this one, yes.
Now, and just as to the Eureka water system, I believe that staff has stated that it believes that system is in fair to good condition, correct?
The engineering witnesses were the folks who had the primary responsibility for that. If that is stated in the staff memo, I could take a look at that.
Well, let me see if I can point you to that. Hold on just a minute. So if you can turn to page 10 of the staff memorandum.
Okay.
And near the top, there's a section that says staff observations of water system.
Yes.
And would you agree with me, it states, at the time of staff's May 12, 2021 inspection, the facilities appeared to be in fair to good condition with the equipment well maintained and exhibiting ordinary wear and tear from normal operation.
Yes, that's what's stated in the memo.
And it further states that at the time of the inspection, staff found the general housekeeping, grounds maintenance, and site security to be very good, correct?
Correct.
Now, as I understand your Servol testimony, you criticized the fair market value derived by the certified appraisers for the water assets because in your reading, that value does not reflect the intended use of the water assets. Is that accurate?
We acknowledge that the appraisal states that it's not based on a future use, but staff is concerned about the paying that fair market value and then immediately having to replace the primary source of water.
Can you point me to anything in 393-320 that specifically refers to fair market value needing to reflect the intended use?
I cannot.
And let me ask you this, I'd say it's a hypothetical to a great extent, but let's say that Liberty Water was going to purchase just the water system. It doesn't have any facilities near Eureka currently, does it?
I don't believe it has any large facilities on the scale that we're discussing.
And so let's say they were intending to not build a new line to Eureka. In that situation, would you believe that the appraisers should provide a higher fair market value of the Eureka water assets than they would if they were doing that same appraisal for Missouri American?
That's too much of a hypothetical for me to really speak to on the stand in this moment. But
Judge, I'm going to object to that. This is speculation. Maybe Mr. Cooper could rephrase the question or restate the question.
Mr. Cooper?
Yeah, I'll be happy to rephrase it, Judge. I guess the real question is that if we look at intended use, won't we end up in a situation where a fair market value appraisal would need to be something different for every potential purchaser?
Again, speculation. We're looking into the future. This is very speculative.
I'll state the objection.
Now, a couple places in your let me back up a little bit. Just one more question down the other line that we were entertaining here. Again, you reflect in your testimony that you think intended use should be taken into account in the fair market value, correct?
that's not the intent of my position, is that the intended use should be considered by the commission in their decision-making on whether or not the purchase is in the public interest. That is impacted, of course, by the fair market value calculation itself, but it's a bigger question. The commission has to decide whether this purchase is in the public interest in granting the CCM.
Well, if I look at your testimony, I guess on page 8, and this is lines 17 to 18. Are you there?
I am.
You say, thus, MAWC's application proposes a market value for the drinking water assets that does not reflect their intended use.
Correct.
That strikes me as referring directly to the market value.
The market value, and it's mentioned in the valuation report and in other testimony does not reflect future intended use.
The fair market
Calculation does not, yes.
Now, you also seem to criticize the purchase price as opposed to the appraisal price. And again, this is on page 8 as well, lines 10 to 11. You say MAWC does not appear to have negotiated a lower purchase price based on the intended use of the assets. Correct?
Correct.
And is there any requirement that a company do that found in 393, 320?
Not that I'm aware of.
Now, if I move down to the bottom of the page and the sentence that starts on line 19, you say, staff has not attempted to calculate how much of a reduction could have been negotiated, but believes it reasonable it should have been reflected in the purchase price negotiations. Now, that suggests to me that there is a mathematical formula for calculating negotiated price reduction. Is that what you meant by that sentence?
No.
So you would agree with me, wouldn't you, that a negotiated price necessarily involves the agreement of both the buyer and the seller, correct?
Yes.
And did you read the testimony of Mayor Flower?
I have, but not immediately before I came up here.
Generally, is it your understanding that the purchase agreement was not executed until after the public vote in this situation?
I do not specifically recall. I'd have to take a look.
Do you think that Missouri American could negotiate a lower purchase price once the price has been voted on by the people of Eureka?
Objection to that too. Mr. Gately's not an attorney. He doesn't specialize in election law by any means.
That objection is sustained.
Let's try it this way. Your specific recommendation, I believe, and this is on page 9, is that Missouri American revise their application to include an appraisal that takes into account the actual condition of the plant assets, the negotiated purchase price that takes into consideration the intended use of the drinking water assets, and refile this application. Is that an accurate reading?
Yes.
And maybe your answer will be the same, but based upon Mayor Flower's testimony, do you believe that a second public vote would be required to accomplish your recommendation?
Same objection. Mr. Gately's not an attorney.
So basically, well, let's back up.
How would you respond then?
I think that he has made a recommendation in his testimony. I think he's familiar with the testimony that's been given in this case, and whether he's an attorney or not, I think he can express his understanding of what would be required to accomplish his recommendation.
Judge, this is really outside the scope of his rebuttal testimony too. There's nothing in here about the city of Eureka vote.
I'll sustain the objection.
So I take it from your recommendation, or from this exchange, while you have a recommendation, it's unclear to you whether, I guess, how or even whether that is possible. Would that be correct? You have a lack of knowledge as to those items?
The same thing. I don't understand why we're staying on this line of questioning about the vote at the city of Eureka.
I'll sustain the objection.
That's all the questions I have, Your Honor.
All right. Chairman Sylvie, do you have any questions? Any questions?
You know what?
I'm sorry.
Actually, I do.
Okay, go ahead.
Sorry, I do have one question. Did staff physically go to the Eureka system?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Any other questions from the commissioners? Mr. Gately, I have a couple of questions. I take it you have, done work on prior staff recommendations that have to do with acquisitions of water and wastewater systems.
Yes.
In those cases, what was the sales metric that was used for the sales? Was it always sales price per customer, or would it occasionally be sales price per amount of treatment through the system?
It's my general understanding that it was price per customer, although that isn't my specific role in these kinds of efforts. I believe, I've been told by other staff members that it was always a price per customer.
Okay. Did you, or did the staff, compare the sales price per customer cost of Missouri American Water's other, recent acquisitions with the present application?
I don't know. That would be a question for Amanda McMillan
All right.
or Dave Puttig.
Okay. Those are all the questions I had. Mr. Williams, do you have any follow-up?
No, thank you.
Ms. Fritz?
Just brief, thank you.
I don't
Oh,
have any
sorry.
questions either, Judge.
I'm sorry, I meant to ask you, but no redirect.
Oh, okay. Yes, redirect.
Okay.
Mr. Gately, Mr. Cooper asked you about fair market value and the statute and where in the statute. The appraisal statute states that the commission can consider intended use. Do you recall that?
I recall you asked me questions about the statute. I don't have the statute in front of me, and I'm not an attorney, so I didn't try to interpret.
Okay, fair enough. Speaking in a very general way, though, the staff of the commission believes that this transaction is not in the public interest. Is that correct?
Correct.
And that is because, at least the water system, the proposed purchase price is so much higher than staff's estimated net book value. Is that correct?
Yes.
Mr. Cooper also asked you about some of your rebuttal testimony on page 8. If you could turn to that quickly, please.
Okay.
So on lines 10 and 11, you stated Missouri American does not appear to have negotiated a lower purchase price based on the intended use of the assets.
Yes.
Could you elaborate on that a little bit?
It's staff's position that an appraisal of the existing water system, a value that came from that admittedly does not reflect the fact that Missouri American, or perhaps the customers at Eureka, don't find it to have the value that it needs to have, evidently, because they're going to replace the source water with different water. They're about to spend an additional estimated, I believe it was $9 to $11 million to immediately replace that source water, and it doesn't seem to make sense to staff that wouldn't be considered in the actual purchase price. There's nothing that requires the purchase price to be the appraisal price, and Missouri American could have considered that in negotiating the actual purchase price.
That's all I have. Thank you.
All right. Thank you for your testimony. Ms. Bryce, you can call your next witness.
Well, our next listed witnesses are Andrew Harris and David Roos, and as we explained, they're not available this week, and I guess towards the end of the day, we'll discuss how to deal with that. So our next witness is David Puttig.
All right. All right, Mr. Bennett, would you raise your right hand? Thank you. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you give in this hearing shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Mr. Buddig, would you please state your name and spell it for the record?
My name is David Buddig, D-A-V-I-D, B-U-T-T-I-G.
Who employs you and what's your job title?
I'm employed by the Missouri Public Service Commission as a professional engineer.
Are you the same David Buddig who contributed to the staff report, which has been marked staff exhibit 100?
I am.
Which parts of the report did you prepare?
I've worked on the depreciation for the water side, and I contributed the depreciation amounts and the net book value for the water side.
Do you have any changes or corrections to your testimony?
I do not.
Your testimony is true and correct to the best of your knowledge?
It is.
Do you have any changes?
I do not.
That's all I have, Judge. I tend to Mr. Buddig for cross-examination.
All right. Mr. Williams, do you have any questions?
No, thank you.
Mr. Cooper?
No question.
All right. Mr. Buddig, first, are there any questions from the commissioners? All right. Mr. Buddig, in your experience with prior acquisitions that you've been involved with on staff recommendations of water and wastewater systems, was the sales metric always sales price per customer, or was it some other metric?
That was never part of my aspects of what my report. Okay. I always dealt with depreciation.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you. Excuse me. I assume Mr. Williams will follow up on that.
That's correct, thank you.
All right.
Same answer, Judge.
Okay. No redirect?
Nothing.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks,
Excuse.
Judge.
All right, would council like to give me an estimate of whether we should take this next witness, or?
From my perspective, I have a little cross, but not a great amount of cross, I think.
This is
My
Mr.
perspective.
Williams, I have none.
Okay, then call your next witness.
Okay, Judge, our next witness is Amanda McMillan. I just have a minute.
All right, Ms. McMillan, would you raise your right hand, please? Thank you. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you give in this hearing shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Ms. McMillan, could you please state and spell your name for the record?
It's Amanda McMillan, A-M-A-N-D-A, M-C-M-E-L-L-E-N.
Who employs you and in what capacity?
I'm employed by the Missouri Public Service Commission as Utility Regulatory Audit Supervisor in the auditing department.
Are you the same Amanda McMillan who caused to be prepared your rebuttal testimony, which is going to be marked as Exhibit 102?
Yes.
Do you have any changes or corrections to your testimony?
I do not.
If I asked you these same questions today, would they be the same?
Yes.
Judge, I'd offer Exhibit 102 and tender Ms. McMillan for cross-examination.
Are there any objections to the exhibit? Hearing none, Exhibit 102 is admitted. Mr. Williams, do you have questions for the witness?
Not at this time, thank you.
Mr. Cooper?
Thank you, Your Honor. Ms. McMillan, would you agree with me that the city of Eureka water and sewer systems are not regulated by this commission?
Yes, that's my understanding.
And they're not required to maintain their utility records in accordance with the Uniform System of Accounts, are they?
Yes. Correct.
And in fact, would you agree that they have not maintained their utility records in accordance with the NARUC USOA?
From my understanding, yes.
Would you agree with me that fair market value and net book value are two completely different concepts?
They are different in some respects.
Let me read you a definition of net book value and see if you agree with this. Net book value consists of the property's original cost less accumulated depreciation.
Correct.
And in fact, and I don't know how you would classify this in your profession, but CIAC or contributions to native construction would also be reduced from the property's original cost.
Correct.
Now, when staff began to try to determine what it believed the net book value would be, was it able to go directly to the city of Eureka and obtain that information from Eureka?
Not initially, no.
And were you ever able to do that? I mean, did Eureka say, oh yes, here's our net book value?
Not a total net book value. We were able to obtain some information from the city.
But that's information you used in your process of deriving a net book value, correct?
Correct.
In terms of fair market value, let me read you a definition and see if you agree with this. The fair market value of a good or service can be defined as the price that a seller is willing to accept and a buyer is willing to pay on the open market in an arm's length transaction.
Judge, I'm going to object to this. Ms. McMillan is not an appraiser. It looks like it sounds like we're getting into appraisal territory here.
Well, I mean, fair market value is a fairly common term, so I'm going to allow the question.
Do you need for me to repeat that?
Yes, please.
Okay. Again, I'm just looking to see what your concept of fair market value is. And this would be my proposed definition. Fair market value of a good or service can be defined as the price that a seller is willing to accept and a buyer is willing to pay on the open market in an arm's length transaction.
In general, I would agree with that, yes.
Now, in your rebuttal testimony, there's a question that says, why does staff believe that staff's estimate of the net book value is more appropriate or is a more appropriate basis to establish the value of the acquired City of Eureka properties than the sales comparison approach used by MAWC? Do you remember that?
I do.
First, I guess.
Could you direct us to what page and line that is?
Sure. That's page 4, lines 1 through 3.
Okay.
Now, you'd agree with me, wouldn't you, that there's no mention of net book value in section 393 and 320?
That is my understanding, yes.
That statute calls for an appraisal by certified general appraisers under chapter 339, correct?
Correct.
And again, well, I can't remember what I've asked or what I haven't asked, so let me try this again here. You would agree that your calculation of net book value is not intended to be a fair market value, correct?
Correct.
Now, on that same page of your testimony, lines 4 to 5, you say, staff is recommending the net book value estimation approach because it is based on cost data associated with actual plant in service that is used and useful, correct?
Correct.
Now, in your calculation of net book value, I think it's page 2 of your testimony, you say you studied documentation related to contributed plant facilities. Is that correct?
Could you point me to that, please?
Sure. Let's try page kind of goes from lines 11 to 12 there. But it says you studied documentation and ultimately related to contributed plant facilities, correct?
No, that was not what was meant by that sentence.
Okay.
It was setting the other documents. This, contributed plant came specifically from, an employee at the city of Eureka.
Okay. But regardless, you took into account, contributed plant or CIAC in your net book value, calculation, correct?
I did, and that's typical.
Yeah.
When we assess evaluation of, utility plant.
Now, when I look at the calculation of net book value that's found in the staff recommendation, the CIAC on the water side is listed at $2,901,918. Is that correct, or you need me to point you to that?
Could you please?
Sure. And this is the staff recommendation. Do you have it with you?
I do. Okay, go ahead.
And this is page 13 of 23 in the staff rec.
Okay,
And there's a table there, correct?
correct.
And that's, at a high level, your calculation of net book value, or you label it here net rate base, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And on the water column for CIAC, do you see the $2,900,000 and some change listed there?
I do.
And that's the amount you assigned as CIAC, correct, for the water system?
Correct.
And basically, if we follow through the math there, it essentially is a subtraction from the plant in service, or what you found to be the original cost of the plant in service, correct?
Correct.
So, and this is just, I don't think this is in dispute, but from your perspective, if plant is constructed by a developer or other and contributed to a city, essentially from your perspective for a net book value, it has a zero net book value, correct?
Correct.
In this case, do you know what that 2.9 million relates to?
It's the complete cost of the arborist development.
And is that a fairly recent development?
I actually don't remember. I think so, though.
But you would agree, wouldn't you, that plant is currently in service and used and useful for the provision of water service to Eureka customers?
As far as I'm aware, yes.
And it belongs to the city of Eureka, correct?
Yes.
So, in that situation, again, would you agree with me that's an example where perhaps the fair market value of that plant is much different than the net value or the net book value of $0?
Yes.
Now, the same could be true of what you consider to be fully depreciated property, correct?
Correct.
And it could be fully depreciated, and yet the plant still remain in service and provide service to the public. Is that true?
Yes, that's my understanding.
And again, for your purposes, though, for setting the net book value, that same plant would be worth $0, correct? Because it's fully depreciated.
That's my understanding.
And again, looking at the table in the staff recommendation, it's a little less obvious probably than the arbors, but there is both 5.9 million and some change in depreciation on the water side and 3.9 million and some change on the sewer side that you subtract from what you believe to be the installation cost or the original cost of plant in deriving your net book value, correct?
Well, to be clear, I actually didn't make the net book value calculations. I just reviewed them. Staff witness Buddy actually made those calculations.
But just functionally, I mean, you understand the process. The accumulated depreciation you list there in the staff rec in that table, it operates as a subtraction from the original cost of plant and service, correct?
Correct.
So that's all the questions I have, Your Honor.
Are there any questions from the commissioners?
Not for me.
All right, I hear none. I have a few questions. Ms. McMillan, I'd like to direct your attention to the staff recommendation, the memo, page 22 to 23, so very near the end of that.
Okay, I'm there.
All right, on page, what, I said page 22, condition number 7, could you take a look at that real?
Yes. I'm familiar with that
Okay.
recommendation.
Okay. How do you envision that condition being accomplished if the commission authorizes the $28 million rate base proposed by the company?
Very similar to what MAC witness LeGrand said. We've grossed up, take probably our net book value that we created and gross it up to come to the $28 million for the purchase or appraisal price.
All right. If the company completes the water system transmission main addition, it anticipates that 5-mile main extension to the city of Eureka, and includes it in the rate base in a future rate case, will it be up to the commission to determine whether the wells included in rate base in this case are retired or kept in the rate base?
That would be something that the parties would review in the next case, and possibly commission would have to make a decision on.
All right. When it comes to plant that's retired or no longer used or useful, what is the accounting treatment for that?
Typically, it's to retire and pull it out of plant and service and pull out the accumulated depreciation if it's no longer used and useful.
Is it pulled out of the rate base?
Yes.
Okay. Did staff compare the per customer cost in this case to Missouri American's other acquisitions? If so, how does it compare?
We look at it in general, and I look at the ones that I've been involved in. And I mean, there's some that are lower, there's some that are higher.
So there has, you did in this case compare them, okay. Had staff used the net book value method to calculate the value of the systems in other acquisition cases?
Yes.
Has it been used in previously unregulated systems like municipal systems?
Yes. As far as I'm aware, every acquisition case we've been a part of through the appraisal process, we've used net book value.
Does staff agree that the fact that Eureka expenses its assets affects the determination of the net book value?
Yes. But we have no way of estimating exactly what those costs would be.
Okay. And are you familiar with the Flynn engineering report?
I am.
Did staff use that at all to perform its net book value calculation?
We reviewed it, but it wasn't really a part of our process of coming up with our number.
I see. All right, Mr. Williams, that's all my questions. Mr. Williams, do you have any follow-up questions?
Yes, thank you. Ms. McMillan, you recall responding that staff uses the net book value approach for Missouri American water acquisitions?
Correct.
Why?
That's what we typically use in addressing any assets for the utility. Typically, net book value is our way of coming up with the value for all the assets.
But why? Is it just because of practice? Is there a particular reason why you use net book value as opposed to some other methodology?
In my experience, that's all we've used. I'm not exactly sure if there's something governing the thing that we have to.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Cooper?
Yes, Judge, just real briefly, in regard to the Flynn report, I think you said earlier perhaps that you didn't do the actual work on the net book value.
I did not.
And so, if staff's work papers indicated use of, the Flynn report data, you wouldn't necessarily know that?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Ms. Prince? Do you have any redirect? Sure.
Ms. McMillan, you and Mr. Cooper were discussing how the table on page 13 works. He went through that table with you.
Correct.
Why, just speaking very generally, why do you use net book value to calculate rate base?
Because it's based on the most available information we have.
Do you take into consideration that the customers have already paid for that, for the depreciation as it's accumulated?
Yes, correct.
And they also pay down the plant service too, right?
Correct.
Thank you.
All right, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Let's take a 10-minute break. So we'll go back on the record. We'll shoot for 11:50. So going off the record.
Testing.
I can hear you, Scott. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, is everyone ready to continue? Mr. Williams?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right, Ms. Brent's call your next witness.
Our last witness for the day is Scott Glasgow, and he's going to be appearing on the WebEx.
Okay.
Mr. Glasgow, are you there?
I am.
You're very soft.
You hear me?
You're cutting in and out,
How about now?
but that's better.
Why don't we try that? Thank you.
All right, can you give me a second, please? All right, Mr. Glasgow, it's Judge Sire. I'd like to swear you in before you testify.
Okay.
So, would you raise your right hand, please? Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you give in this hearing shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
All right. Thank you. Ms. Fritz, go ahead.
Mr. Glasgow, would you please state your name for the record and spell it?
My name is Scott Glasgow. That's SCOTTGLASGOW.
Who employed you and what's your job title?
I work for the Missouri Public Service Commission. I'm a senior research and data analyst for the Customer Experience Department.
Are you the same Glasgow that contributed to staff's report, which has been marked Staff Exhibit 100?
I am.
Do you have any changes, or what parts of the report did you prepare?
My portion was the customer notice and customer experience portion, as well as some recommendations if the commission approves this acquisition.
Do you have any changes to your parts of the report?
I do not.
And your parts of the report are true and correct to the best of your knowledge?
They are.
Judge, we tender Scott Glasgow for cross-examination.
All right, Mr. Williams, do you have questions?
No, I do not. Thank you.
Mr. Cooper?
No question.
All right, Mr. Glasgow, I have, well, actually, do any of the commissioners have questions?
I have no question.
All right, hearing none, Mr. Glasgow, I have a question. In your position in the Customer Experience Department, have you or any of your colleagues that you're aware of received a call or complaint from a voter, now a customer, who communicated frustration or remorse that their city sold their water system or sewer system to a regulated utility because now the rates have increased?
Can I ask you a clarifying question, Judge? Are you specifically talking about Eureka? Or are you talking about any?
No, not specifically Eureka. It would be the city, similar situations, municipalities that have sold their systems to a company such as Missouri American Water.
I can't tell you specifics, but I'm sure I know of citizens in a city that have complained because a corporation took them over, similar to Missouri American Water, and due to the amount of cost that it would take to make that water drinkable or to bring it up to code, customers have called to complain that about the cost increase.
A similar question, again, your experience and whether you're aware of your colleagues having received complaints about after the transaction that service has been diminished.
Not offhand. We do receive, the commission receives complaints, whether there's There's a leak in the area that hasn't been fixed. But there's certain complaints and those are typically resolved, or maybe a billing issue, but in general, no.
Okay. And then, finally, have you received complaints, from customers that had previously been municipal customers and now, are customers of, the larger regulated utility, that utility, the new utility, is failing to deliver on the promises that they made prior to the election and the transaction sale?
I don't have any knowledge of a instance of that complaint.
All right, those are the only questions I have. Mr. Williams, do you have any follow-up questions?
I do not. Thank you.
Mr. Cooper?
No question.
And Ms. Prince, do you have redirect?
No, nothing.
All right, Mr. Vasco, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
All right, Ms. Prince, any further witnesses to call today at least?
No, we're done with our witnesses for today.
Okay, then let's discuss witnesses that could not be here today, Andrew Harris and David Roos. Do you still anticipate them being necessary witnesses?
Maybe the question's more appropriate for Mr. Cooper and Mr. Williams.
Sitting here today, we would waive any cross on those witnesses in order to move the procedure forward.
Mr. Williams?
Public counsel has no questions and does not object to their testimony being admitted into evidence.
Unless the commission has questions for them.
Well, first of all, there's not been any direct testimony, et cetera, filed for those witnesses, correct?
They contributed to the staff report.
Okay, they did. Okay.
And the staff report's in evidence, though, isn't it? I think it's been offered and admitted already.
Are there any, do the commissioners anticipate having any questions for those two witnesses? No, I don't. All right, then we will not extend the hearing for the sake of those witnesses. Would the parties like to go over their exhibit list and make sure exhibits have been admitted? Well, first of all, before we get there, Ms. Bench, are you keeping track of which exhibits have been admitted?
I can tell you off the record, so I don't have to write it down.
All right, let's go off the record then. All right, we are back on the record. All right, Ms. Brent, let's go through those with exhibit numbers again. So 100, 101, 102, 103, 104, 105, all admitted.
No, I don't think so. I recall having 103 admitted, that's the first engineering report.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that we admitted the second one because it's already attached to somebody's testimony.
Correct.
And then 105 is the valuation report, and that's attached to somebody's testimony too. So that has not been admitted. 106 is the USPAP. Would ask the commission to take judicial notice of that.
Should we take notice of that?
I think we admitted 107 and 108,
Yes, that's what I have.
and 109 was not offered.
Correct. And then, Mr. Cooper, I have exhibits 1 through 12 admitted.
That's consistent with what I have here.
Okay. Are there any other matters to be addressed before we adjourn?
Judge, if you don't mind, you queried Mr. Glasgow about if he had any knowledge of any instances where seller of assets or people affected by it were unhappy afterward.
Mm-hmm.
I'm aware of a condemnation case that's reported in the Court of Appeals that involves such a circumstance. And I can provide that citation to you if you'd like.
Go ahead.
1993 Moab Lexus 1361 or 147 PUR 4th 224. It involves Missouri American Water Company's, or is a result of Missouri American Water Company's acquisition of the City of Mexico's water system.
All right. According to the procedural schedule, initial briefs are due by February 14th, and then reply briefs by February 22nd. Is there anything further? All right, I'll adjourn the hearing. We'll go off the record.
Thank you.